Morning and welcome to Stellar Orientation. Whether you're a permanent Stellar employee or a contract employee, there's a phase of the orientation that deals with what we call hazard communication. So what we're going to cover in this phase of the orientation is hazard communication. We are a chemical manufacturing plant. There are hazards here. We need to communicate those hazards to you. Now, you have a form that has been handed out, and we'd like to fill out the heading of that at this time. Very top line, would you print your name where it says name, and be sure to print legibly so it can be read later. Next to name, would you put today's date in the slot provided, and then underneath your name, would you put your social security number? And then the next line down, it says contract agency name. Well, if you're a Stellar employee, leave that blank. If you're a temporary worker or a contractor, would you put in the contract agency's name on the line, contract agency name? And then finally, you have trainer's name. In that line, I'd like you to put my name. Danny, D-A-N-N-Y, and then the last name is spelled H-E-I-T-E-R-T. Now, our first element of our hazard communication program is item number 1, deals with the hazardous communication standard was created in 1983. And as an employee, permanent or temporary, you have a right to be communicated what are the hazards that Stellar manufacturer is exposing you to. That's called the hazard communication regulation. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can do that with MSDS sheets that we make available to you. We can do that through labeling. So what we want to talk about first is MSDS sheets. Now, the purpose of an MSDS sheet is to provide you with documentation of the hazards of a particular chemical. So a MSDS sheet is specific to a chemical, and at Stellar you will see MSDS sheets for all the materials used to produce our finished products. Now, MSDS sheets are an obligation provided by OSHA to chemical manufacturers, facilities that distribute chemicals for those manufacturers, and any employee and any employer who's going to provide his employees an environment that has those chemicals present. Well, Stellar Manufacturing fulfills 2 of those identities. We are a chemical manufacturer, so we're bound by this hazard communication regulation as a chemical manufacturer, and we are also an employer who's exposing employees potentially to chemicals. Now, Stellar has available for your use and your review MSDS sheets, material safety data sheets, histories of these chemicals in 3 different locations. The first location, and they'll always be in yellow binders, 3 yellow binders, alphabetized. Now, the first location where MSDS are available are in the quality control laboratory. The second location where these are used most often by our employees, both permanent and temporary, our contractors, is in the break room. Now, in the break room, you'll see our microwave stoves there. Right underneath, there is cupboards, and underneath those cupboards below the microwaves, you will find 3 binders in alphabetical order with the MSDS sheets for Stellar manufacturing. Now, we would provide for any employee or contractor, we would provide copies of MSDS if you told the safety officer or a supervisor which MSDS you wanted a copy of. One of those copies would be made available to you. Now, so our 2 locations of 3 are the quality control laboratory in the break room underneath the microwaves, and finally in the shipping receiving office in the back of the plant, the shipping and receiving office. 5, 4, 3, 2. An MSDS sheet is worthwhile to have and preview because it will be divided into 16 parts. Although there will be assortment, hundreds of different chemicals you could be exposed to, all the MSDS sheets by regulation are designed the same way, and they are divided in 16 parts. In the first part of any MSDS, you will get the technical name, the chemical name of that material. In the second part of any MSDS, you will find the components or the ingredients that go into making that chemical and manufacturing that chemical. In the third part of any MSDS, and the third part is very important, it's called hazard identifications. It will tell you your routes of exposure, whether that material can hurt you by routes of inhalation, by eye contact, skin contact, or ingestion into the mouth. It will give you symptoms and signs of exposure if you were exposed to that chemical, whether or not that chemical is available to be involved in combustion or fire. And there are different hazard rating scales, 0 through 4, where 0 is no hazard, 4 is the highest. Often a hazard rating for that chemical will be in Section 3 of any MSDS. Section 4 will tell you if you were exposed to the material, you did incur symptoms, what are the first aid provisions for that particular chemical. In the fifth part, if that chemical is ignitable, if it can burn, it will tell you how to extinguish that chemical in a fire environment, or if it doesn't burn, it still could be around other things that are involved in a fire. It will tell you the hazards of that material if it is around other materials that can burn. But primarily you get which extinguishers will work and won't work in MSDS Section 5. MSDS Section 6, if there is an emergency release, an accidental release of a material, solid or liquid, gaseous, how do you recapture that material? That's Section 6. Number 7, handling and storage. It will tell you temperatures that are appropriate or inappropriate to store that material, what type of packaging material is appropriate or not appropriate for storing that material. That's Part 7 of an MSDS. In Section 8, you will find personal protective gear needed for that particular material. You will find things like what type, if a respirator is needed, what type of respirator is needed, is noise protection needed, is skin protection needed, what kind of skin protection is needed. All that is found in Section 8. Section 9 will give you chemical and physical characteristics of a material. It will tell you things like what it looks like, what it smells like. It will tell you if the material, if it was released or uncontainerized, could that material get airborne? And a property that we're very concerned with here at Stellar, it's called pH, the power of hydrogen. And so the reason in Section 9 we have our employees familiar with pH of a material, and not all materials have pH, particularly your corrosive materials will have that chemical characteristic called pH, is because that is a very good predictor of ability to harm skin. So we tell our employees there's a 14-point scale with 7 in the middle of the pH scale. We tell them at the far ends of this scale, a 4 or below, or a 10 or higher. 10 to 14 or 4 down to 0. Out on the edges of this scale, your skin is at high risk. The further you are towards the edge of these scales, the more your skin is at risk of severe burns. Now, in Section 10 of an MSDS, it will tell you if that material is stable under most normal ambient conditions, 72 degrees Fahrenheit, normal air pressure, what types of things would make this material decompose and break down into its component parts, thereby releasing potential gases, causing fires. This is called reactivity. It's found in Section 10. And the reason we are very concerned about that here is because some materials here are very water reactive. Number 11, we will also have in any MSDS a section called toxicology. It will tell you that if you were exposed to a material and you breathed it in or got it in your skin or had it on your hands and then introduced it into your mouth, what organs of the body would be at risk because of that exposure to that chemical? Target organs are found in toxicological information. It will also tell you whether you will suffer symptoms in a very short amount of time, or the opposite of that is called a chronic exposure, whether it takes long-term repeated exposures for symptoms to emerge. Section 12 of any MSDS is called ecological information. How damaging is the material to soil, water, and air? Section 13 is disposal considerations. If the material hits the floor of the plant, if we call it floor sweepings here, that is a disposable item that we will either neutralize internally in the facility, or we will have a waste hauler dispose of it. Section 13 tells us what kind of waste it is and how to dispose of it. And finally, any MSDS will have a section called transportation. It will tell you which of the 9 Department of Transportation categories, based on the primary hazard of the chemical, that the Department of Transportation has classified that material as. As you'll see in a second, the 2 primary materials found at Stellar are Department of Transportation Class 5, which are called oxidizers, and Department of Transportation Class 8, which is called corrosives. Now let's go on to item number 2 on your list. Personal safeguards have been issued, and let's talk about what those personal safeguards are. Because we are a chemical manufacturer, and we just talked about the communicated to you the hazard you could be exposed to, let's talk about the safeguards we provide you. First of all, basic equipment in the plant is steel toe shoes, a hat with a brim, and safety glasses with side shields. Now, the reason that is basic equipment here is our chemicals, our powders, do have a tendency in the machining process to become airborne. And it might be at a level where they could not even be visible, but they could be present. We have found out over the years through experience that if any of the powders or granules collect in the hair on a hot day, a moist day, what you would find is sweat mixing with the chemical, and it would run down into the eyes. Now, the eyes are extremely sensitive to our chemicals, and you can severely damage the eyes. So a corrective action was put in place and has really helped Stellar Manufacturing and the employees, has been hats with brims. So the brims are always forward, and we wear safety glasses with eye shields. Now, in some cases, we do make available what we call goggles that create a better seal, and in some specific cases, we may ask an employee to wear goggles instead of safeties with side shields. Now, other basic equipment we have here is we issue either latex or nitrile gloves because we don't want the chemicals on the skin. In the plant, you will have to wear long sleeves and long pants with socks. Now, the reason is, although the materials we use are extremely damaging to eye tissue, they can be irritating to skin tissue, which is not a severe an injury, but it's an injury nonetheless. So what we do is we wear long sleeves, we wear long pants, we wear socks, and we provide you out on the plant floor with latex and rubber gloves to wear as you are around the chemicals. Now, for breathing protection, permanent Stellar employees have been issued, they've been issued both a half and a full face mask with the proper filters and cartridges in there. The reason they are issued those type of respiratory protection is because they have been examined by a physician. They've gone through what's called a pulmonary function test. They've been approved to wear NIOSH certified respiratory protection. Pulmonary function test is not required for what are called filtering face pieces. So what we can make available to temporary workers, contract employees, is what's called a filtering face piece, also known as a dust mask. Now, these dust masks have on them, if you'll read the small print, they will have an N95. Now, the 95 is important because it means this mask will filter and catch 95% of airborne powders or particles that are 10 microns across or smaller. That is extremely small. A 10 micron particle, if you align 40 of those side by side, they wouldn't be as wide as a human hair. So these get a single 10 micron particle, and anything bigger than that they get. So they're very effective, and we will show you and instruct you how to use those. So dust masks are also made available to temporary and contract workers, half and full face respirators for our permanent employees. Now, in some areas of our plant, we have noise protection equipment required in certain areas. Predominantly the PPG production room and where our granulation systems run in Bay 1, in Bay 5, and in what we call process area 3. There are signs indicating noise protection equipment required. So what we make available is what we call earplugs, and they reduce the decibel rating by 32 decibels as soon as you insert these properly in your ears. What we also make available is what are called earmuffs. They reduce the noise potential by 30 decibels, and you can actually use these in tandem. So you will see permanent employees of Stellar in some areas of the plant wear noise protection.